Well, I think it's about time to kick off our panel discussion. So if you have any further questions about what was just shown, we can probably feed those into the upcoming panel thing. So moving forward, this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, a total experiment. We are trying this for the first time. The intent of these forum discussions is really to get everybody to talk about a topic that we all find very relevant to the community. So we really want you guys to all participate. But because we know it's virtual, we're going to do our forum prompts as a sort of panel type setup. And Ramon unfortunately had to, well, I see he's on the call here. If Ramon wants to join, feel free to come on up and turn on your microphone. Are you going to be able to join us, Ramon?
Yeah, I'm actually half and halving it, but I was just listening in. I joined.
Sorry, I just called you out.
Yeah, I jumped in midway because I didn't get the invite until close to like 45 minutes into it.
Uh-oh. Well, welcome, Ramon. So Nicola is going to be our moderator, and Babak, Zubi, myself, and Ramon, if you want to join, will be technically the panelists. So the way this is going to work is that we'll spend maybe 7 minutes on the panel conversation about the topic, and then we want to bring everybody else in to talk about it as well. So let's see how this goes, and I'll kick it off to you, Nicola, to keep this running.
Thanks. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And our panelists will actually answer how data in different ways is penetrating within architecture profession. And we were kind of trying to frame these forum prompts through three general different contexts. So the first one is more about data science and how it's addressing the firm. The second one is how data science is actually addressing the individual more if you're a professional or a student. And then thinking about how data science will change the profession, the context of the profession in the future. So, I mean, Baba gave great insight how data can be used to inform the design process. But for the first forum prompt question, I want to hear how the other firms are also using data in design and what type of data are they using for some of the projects. So anyone can jump in and start.
Is there a way to write this prompt down so that everyone can read it? Tell you what, why don't I?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I can just share my screen.
I can set the ball rolling just as we're trying to get the prompt on the screen. But with Inform Studio, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So with Inform Studio, a classic example is the Ferrari dealership that we finished, and the data that we worked with was point clouds because it was a metal stored framing that was going to receive this double curved skin. And so we received the point cloud and we're able to use those points to rationalize the skin that was already developed, using Grasshopper. So it's point cloud data and pretty much just using that as a base to modify a skin that was already built. That's one scenario of how we're using data.
So it was in a way kind of taking the design and making sure that when you build the actual design, you use the data to inform the
Exactly
construction process in a way.
Yeah.
So do you? I don't know if anyone else have.
I'll chime in. I mean, I'm currently working on a project. It's one of our larger clients, and we've had a long history with them, and they are working on basically the same building type, like offices, on a on an annual basis, let's just say. But we do so many of them that we've gathered so much information that to do a transformation of their of their buildings, given a few pieces of data like the square footage and what it's going to be used for, we can quickly go in and do a test fit for them very, very quickly, rather than starting from scratch. And that's like a database that's been collected over the years with history with this company and working with them to fine tune it. And then currently updating all that information as we move forward and get feedback from them. So that's like a piece of information that we're using a large data set to automate a lot of the processes that we're going into now.
Cool.
Would you call that a qualitative data set or a quantitative?
It's a little bit of both, actually, because we need to know how many people are going to be working in there. And then also, along with this, we've developed a set of guidelines to create an aesthetic. It's not rigidly, not rigidly like a guideline or a set of rules of how it should be, but like a set of aesthetics that we've done, and we keep refining it as we move forward in terms of design. So it's kind of like a live data set, but it's kind of like a living data set that we keep referring back to and creating a database for. I mean, ultimately, we'd like to automate the whole process to get most of that data in, because right now, a lot of going back to specific projects, we still have to go back and dig through it. Can we make that faster? Yeah. Those are things that we're struggling with. But yeah, we are
curious.
Data to move forward.
Okay, and is that the case? Is this the kind of data that is best represent or is well represented in a matrix or like in a tabulated form?
Yeah, actually, we have it tied into an Excel. You put in a couple of numbers, and we'll have like how many people will fit in there, how many rooms you have, how many type of amenities we have to provide for in that space. So that gives us the building blocks to begin with. Kind of similar to what Babak was discussing at the end of his presentation.
Yeah, I think the benchmarking, because every architecture office has a ton of historical data that we've used for every project, offices, hospitals, and we rarely go back and document those because those are very valuable data that we can have. Programming, I mean, they're valuable in terms of the program, in terms of layout, like how much space is needed, but also in terms of layout. So thinking about like how can we really go back and look at our own project and kind of learn from them, make them well documented. I think that would be that's something that we all need to think about.
That would be a fantastic app if you could make all of the data that we've done in the past to be Googleable, or just to get them very quickly through like a few keyword strokes. I mean, I think that's
Actually, Ramon, we're working on that. So Ramon's an architect at Smith Group, and I'm on the technology and practice side. We probably should have done introductions. One of the members of TIP is building this app called Rave to basically collect all of our room data, both as a way of almost visually querying a Revit model, because you can imagine how it's hard to kind of see the data that's in a Revit model. Sheets and plans, Revit's kind of clunky. So it's this very fast and flexible data viewer for Revit. But critically, it's also going through the process of carefully assigning and codifying all of our information for like room assignments, making sure they're all done the same way in order to generate a clean database of this kind of information so that down the road, we can do what you just described there, Ramon, which is kind of say like, hey, how many people fit in here? Well, if that data was collected properly and cleaned up and served up right, we could get those answers. And then down the line, I think, build very powerful apps or algorithms that can leverage it. But I think what we realized is that right now our data was garbage. We weren't collecting it well enough, and we were going to be screwed in 5 years. So if we make the right decisions now about cleaning and collecting our data properly today, even if we can't use it, in 5 years, we definitely will be able to. It's clean.
And that's probably an industry-wide issue in terms of what is the state of the data that we have. Like, is it clean enough for someone to work with? I don't think as an industry we actually collect data in a way that we can even benefit from one another's data.
Yeah, exactly. Like setting those practices, because especially with BIM models, you can't really set those practices and then make this historical data. So I think there's a huge opportunity with any BIM model for collecting that kind of data. Because every time programming is a one-off thing. Like we just like it starts from scratch. It really shouldn't. But
because we're sitting on like terabytes and terabytes of like project files, and it's like we can only imagine if we could like just focus in on all the data and like sift through it very efficiently, we could really, get a lot of really good nuggets out of that.
I just want to bring something up. Zuby mentioned the word clean. It's like, is our data clean enough? And I think that's kind of a data science word, right? Is it clean data, tidy data? I think across the board, in general, weren't taught data science in school. I think I kind of assume that of most of the people. Babak is an exception here, of course. Most of us weren't trained in data science, and I wonder if our firms, if you don't have someone trained in data science, would you even be able to recognize what clean data is? Or in a sense, I feel like we're just guessing, which might lead us to say, do we need to have a data expert on staff in order to identify what we're doing right or wrong? Or do you think that architects can figure that out themselves?
Well, as an architect, I had a great teacher in studio when we were like working, and like we draw, and when you draw, you can actually lie. That's one of the things that's one of the nice things about drawing is that I can actually lie and fudge and make it look good. In reality, does it work? Well, we don't know until we get it into like CAD, because CAD, once we did that transformation, it starts to bring out the truth because you're working with rules now that are rigid, and especially when you're converting something to 2 dimensions and then drawing out a plan. So it's kind of an interesting discussion that, we're drawing, we can lie. Like if I'm photoshopping an image to sell to a client, the model is made out of like a Western front. We exaggerate the angles, make it look sellable. But when we transfer it over to BIM and people start to build it out, you start to see that, it doesn't meet code. It's like, I can't walk through this, and this is too big. The existing doesn't really fit in this category. So in terms of like clean drawings, there's still a ways to get there.
Yeah.
I like what you said. You mentioned the ability to fudge, and I had a very interesting project where we have actually a whole data solutions wing within Smith Group of data analysts. And we were working on a project that didn't have any physical walls or structures like we'd expect. It was more of a programming exercise with a large client trying to take business units from several buildings, consolidate them, move them around. Without getting into the details, this data analyst on the team, her job was to build the data model. And there's a really interesting, not a conflict, but an interesting strain in almost ideologies where the design team expected and was demanding a level of flexibility, fuzziness. You had the word lie, not necessarily like lie, but flexibility. Close enough. It's close enough. Whereas the data analyst was really pushing back because there's a very different perspective, because things had to fit in the right rows. Things had to be connected, and you can't fudge the data model like I think we are used to doing in a design process. Close enough was a fail, not something half useful. I'm wondering if others on the call have found that that data science's strictness, is that because we're maybe approaching things wrong, or is there a way, what does it mean for architects? Is data strict? Does it need to be?
Yeah. Sorry.
I think if we approach our work, I think with the end result not being a set of PDFs or a model that you turn over to a client or a builder, but the data that's part of the model, that's and its use in the long run, then I think we'll and I think it already has happened. We are seeing that data is important, and computer learning, and starting to leverage all of those things.
I think the rigidness. I think in both data practices and architecture or design practices in general, I think there are these two issues. One is the question of how we think. So there is this intuition part, which designers are heavily based on intuition, and that's I mean, if you really want to get any design work done, you need to have that intuition. So difference between a very experienced architect and a new architect is that the experienced architect has very great intuition. So just looks at the layout and sees everything, can imagine what can happen. But the thing is, with data scientists, their mind is more analytical, and it's not as much based on intuition rather than analysis. So that's one part where the conflict comes in. And I think it's not that data analysts don't have intuition. They definitely need intuition. But the way they make decision, I think about decision making, is more analytical compared to architects. This is more intuitive. I think it both can really benefit from each other. Architects can benefit from that analytical perspective that a data scientist brings to the table, and data scientists can benefit from intuition of architects dealing with a super complex problem like a building and seeing like how that gonna work. So I think both need to kind of move a bit so they meet in a kind of sweet spot.
I think
Also,
it also depends on what are you using data for. Are you explaining or are you exploring? Because that starts to shape who is exploring with data. You probably need a data scientist for both, but more for the exploration with that data. You most likely will need a data scientist to kind of figure something out. What relationships exist? What trends are we seeing? No, if
and on the other side, I think like another question that I want to ask, and it's related with the prompt one, is about the designer side, like the architectural side as a firm, and then as a data scientist. But I think, do you think actually in regards to the client, when you are more precise and you are able to kind of quantify things that are more qualitative in terms of architecture, does it contribute to for the client? Because if you can come down to the client and be like, my data shows that if you proceed with this design solution, it will help you in certain way. Do you think that's important?
Definitely valuable if you can communicate and prove. I've heard that a lot of times, that they like seeing the analysis or the data because it's ammo for the design. It's very convincing, which is a value to the client.
at the end of the day, the client, it's about communication. And so Eric Kluster, who's a design project architect at Inform, he's on the call, sent out just coronavirus visualization that communicated 3 scenarios or 4 scenarios of how we can handle this pandemic, but it communicated in a way that I didn't have to read anything per se. I could just see the visualization and be like, oh, that makes sense. So for us communicating with the client, are we just adding jargons with the data, or they can actually see the data visualized in a way that, oh, that just makes sense in terms of how you're moving forward, design direction. I feel sometimes it's a communication thing, not necessarily a data thing. It's just how we're explaining the end result. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's a good segue to prompt two. What new skills do we need in the age of data? Because I think data visualization and communication is critical.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed more and more online platforms about infographics and data visualization and those sorts of things to help take a matrix and convert it into something visual.
I think from us coming from an architecture background, I think you can see it in the way that I'll coin them the big style diagrams, how that has like taken off and proliferated within the industry. And I think it really speaks to a clarity of communication. And because the diagrams are constructed the way they are, it's almost like they couldn't do it any other way. Like, this is the right way to do it. Look how they've kind of narrated their argument here. And I think those same kind of principles apply to leveraging data and using that as a tool for communicating goals, impacts, etc. during the design process and the decision-making process that takes place during the design process.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. So clients want to see design decision quantified, and as you were saying, Azubika, they want the decision to be. They want us to show the design decision or the numbers in a way that's understandable. So it's finding that balance. Yeah, it's because you can't just bomb them with data and say like bomb with numbers. It's another way of explaining. It's like a sketch. It's the same way that a nice sketch can convey a concept. A nice piece of data or visualization can really do the same thing.
So more to inform that is, you can just use it as something that can inform the design decision.
Yeah, and it's also about speed too, because we're dealing with more data, and the more data that you present to them, the more confusing it gets. Having a clear chart or a diagram to explain the complexity of what you're showing in a graphic is a lot more worthwhile than shooting up an Excel spreadsheet and then pointing to the numbers and showing, oh, that number is bigger than this one, because I'll totally lose it. And we don't have that kind of timeline anymore. It's like, you've got 60 minutes to get through this meeting and explain everything that you've done. Infographics, a clear diagram or charts, however we do it to explain the complex data that we got to arrive at a certain design, that's worthwhile. You get a decision out of that.
I mean, I'm still in school and kind of part in the professional world, so I can see how the school is changing on one side and how we're not learning data science in school, of course, but there are some implications, at least using Grasshopper, where you can again tackle data a little bit. Do you think in the future, whether you are a professional or you're someone who is in school, we would be equipped with all of this kind of knowledge when we enter the professional world? Like me getting out of school, should I be taught about most of these things and be ready in the future when I work as an architect to utilize them? Or data science, do you think that data science will stay as something that's a separate profession where you can have a data scientist in your team strictly working with your data?
I think you have to be data savvy. I think you have to be able to work with your data scientists and the team that you're with, because it's no longer a me, it's we. As we move forward into the new generations, because everybody's got specialized in certain ways, but it's this communication, having a distinct direction within the team, and holding that together is that intensity. I think that really pays off in getting a design sold and embraced by the client, and it makes it even more powerful.
Yeah, and I think
I would answer your question, but go ahead.
Sorry, but I was just about to say that there's a difference between data literacy and being a data scientist. So there is no reason that we say we take construction courses and we take a structure courses. That doesn't mean that we're going to calculate the structures as architects, but we know when an engineer design it, and we have the consciousness about it. So I don't see any reason that we cannot have like a 3-credit course around data literacy. The same way you have a structure, the same way you have all those construction courses or theory courses.
Do you find it as a constraint today?
Say again?
I was saying, do you find it as a constraint today as a data scientist working with the design team oftentimes?
It would be easier to just for both sides to communicate then, to understand the value of data. And as I said, it's not about learning how to run the code, but it's just more about understanding like what's the potential of data. Yeah, you're gonna see things that you just originally don't see. So The same way that like it makes the communication between an engineer and a designer easier when you say when an engineer, a structural engineer says, this can't be built, so, or this doesn't hold. So you remember your structure course from second year in college and say, okay. But then you also, when designing, you make decisions that are structurally sound and structurally you have like built into your intuition.
So from your perspective, I was thinking about the T-shaped individual, right? How you have some generalized knowledge, then you take a deep dive in a topic. Obviously, we're going to have specialists. Can you help us clarify what type of thing might belong to the generalist versus the specialist? For example, knowing how to understanding the different types of data, whether it's categorical or continuous. What would you recommend people on this call learn to get general data literacy?
I think that what you said is super valuable, just understanding different types of data. The other thing is just understanding the basic like different types of analysis. Just understanding the intuition behind it. So what's a regression really? What's a classification? What is a clustering? And these are concepts themselves are pretty, there are really good books out there. There are really good YouTube videos that you can watch that explain them. So it's kind of breaking them down. The other thing is just seeing examples of how analysis is done. So like this is how you think about it, how people looked at a certain kind of data and then translated it into something which is meaningful. So seeing a few case studies that just seeing the process is extremely useful. And then learning some basic, some of the basic calculation just gives a better understanding of how it can be done, how it can be, performed. So that gives a better intuition again.
I also think one of the biggest things in support to understanding or having data literacy is also being curious, just generally. I think Randy Deutsch, professor, I think it's University of Illinois, is that what it is? I can't remember, but
IIT.
IIT, right? Okay, yeah, he's clearly stated that if you're not curious, there's just no chance for you in general. So that mindset that Babak was talking about, a mindset shift that coming out of school, you should just have by default. I'm going to interact with whoever imagined you're going to have look at the makeup of their team, with these different did you say an ethnographic? I don't even know what that is, but you have to interact with these people. But if you're not curious enough to even know how to engage them, yeah, you're lost.
It's basically more about how you're gonna framing the problem properly and then trying to address the problem, solving the problem, which was a good example with the lecture with the visibility study. As I explained. So I think we should move to the prompt 3, just because we're running out of time. Do you, after this lecture, actually, do you see a way how you can integrate data more in your design process? And also, I'm not seeing any other questions. If anyone has any question or anyone from the audience just wants to ask a question, you can really do it, because I don't see all the questions.
Yeah, so for future possibilities, I think there is huge possibility in different ways. I think we one area that I think can be a lot of architecture firms have to start investing in is, as I say, just like using their own project as data. The other part is, and the other major part is trying to kind of find different data sets and different source of data that can be useful for our projects and for our way of thinking. And a lot of it is spatial data. I think that's where architects can kind of insert themselves in the conversation, because I'm thinking about, so when you look at reports by a lot of say consulting firms, you can look at the report by BCG or those kind of firms, you see very interesting analysis, but what is missing is often is that building component, that spatial component. And the reason is because most of the people who work in consulting firms have business backgrounds. They come from business, they come from statistics. We are coming from the spatial. We think three-dimensionally, we think spatially. You put different spaces, impacts your business, impacts your health, well-being, all those stuff. So I think that's kind of a niche that architects can, and urban planners, I think both professions and designers can kind of insert themselves to, kind of making the value of spatial data more and more clear to clients. It's not just space-less data. It's very spatial. Everything is spatial.
So when you say spatial, your example of Manhattan and at a giant urban scale is very clear. I can imagine using GIS type information overlays. That's a scale many of us don't work at unless we're at a urban planning scale. Is there a campus level or even a building level spatial data that you've been exposed to that we might all consider leveraging?
So campus level data is possible with a lot of our phone location data. So there are phone location services out there that have accuracy of about 10 feet, and that's kind of, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for getting some insights to how a campus is being used. Or so that's. But then the thing is, we should start the conversation and then see what are the other data sources. We might use wireless data. A lot of campuses have their own wireless systems, and then wireless systems are really good at collecting data. So those are, and I've seen examples of using them. But and bringing our creativity into that data exploration be done. So yeah, I think there are data sources. It's just starting to engage with them and finding the right way in like shopping mall scale. You can do it. Stadiums. It might be harder when you're talking about the house, or like a small school. But in this like medium level scale, which is between urban and between a building, we are getting better and better with algorithms are getting more accurate. Data collection is getting stronger. So.
Does anyone from the audience have any question?
What were the other prompts on that final one?
Yeah, well, one of the things is maybe Baba can again address the question is what works well and what doesn't work well based on the experience so far when you apply data science in architecture.
Can you get a more like clarify it, the person? Yeah.
Like for example, do you think? Go ahead, Dylan.
I was just going to say, from a performance analysis side, we've definitely drowned in data. I love your quote about like the bombing them with data. I'm guilty of that for sure. Simplicity and clarity is key. It is so easy to get tripped up in trying to show too much in a graphic. And I'm curious what everyone else thinks, but I've found that if you have 3 things to say, make 3 graphics, and each one say the one thing and say it clearly and well, rather than trying to put it all together.
Yep. Detail that. Yep.
I think probably to elaborate a little more on that last prompt, are there areas in practice, in design, in documentation, those types of things where you can see the leveraging of data being substantially more impactful than other areas?
Actually,
I like that question. Go ahead, Ruby.
Yeah, this in terms of just the health of BIM models. Something I found recently. I don't know if you guys have heard of BIM Beats. It's a bunch of computational designers who have formed the company. Conrad is one of them. They have a way of collecting like Revit warnings and categorizing them in a way that they help you see in real time the health of your BIM file, the federated model, and just other like aspects of your BIM file that we be helpful to planning and adjusting accordingly. So I don't know if that's the most uh, impactful use of data to answer your question, but I just saw that actually recently.
Yeah, I mean, we have it live in our files. We have like we have it written into our script where when we load it in, it runs. It's a Dynamo script which tells us the health of our files and its connections, and it tells you prompts of how to get back to getting it back to health. So there's it's basically a building on top of what has been presented. I think it was like 2 years ago. There was like a beginning script to quantify the error messages that you get at the very beginnings of Revit files, but nobody really does anything with it. Well, we've done something with it, so that it gives you like a health status for your file. I mean, that's just basically just taking the data of what's there. It's kind of like interesting. Um,
Is it working in a way where like it's calculating, let's say, how many, I don't know, family types you have inside, how many
yes, yeah,
Exactly.
it does that all because when you last save it, basically it saves all that stuff in your file, so that when it reloads, it actually goes in and it reads it while it's loading up, and then it gives you like a splash screen of, hey, these are the metrics of your file, and it's like it's not working really well, and it gives you like a set of instructions to get it back to normal, like purge out your families because you've got twice as many that you really need for this file size. So it's got like uh, a scalable thing. So if you're working on a small project, it gives you less, but if you're working on something gigantic, it gives you more flexibility because of just the sheer size of it. It's worked out pretty well. I mean, we've had it running for at least a year. We've seen better performances in files. That's just like one way of optimizing like a Revit file or data that's at hand.
Yeah, because I think
Okay.
also I've seen something similar in HKS, but my question was always, how do you define, when a project is too complex? So how do you define the health status of all of these projects? You define it probably by size, right?
Yep.
Smaller it is, you can allow less families or something. The bigger it is, you can allow more families inside when it's counting how healthy the model is. But how do
Mhm.
you make it flexible when the project is too complex?
That's when we go to the IT team and say, "Hey, can we allow this?" Or you can just like live with the unhappy face
Right?
that he gives you. Um, it's just giving you like a health. Again, it's just the thermometer of this is the this is the status of your file. On some files, on some projects, we basically just accepted it that it's never going to get any better than this. It's a sick file. It's big. It stretched its way over like 5 states, and it's just big and monstrous. So we live with it. We got it done. The project is out the door. I don't think we want to go back and revisit it unless we can get an intern to do that. But yeah, I mean, these are things that you can actually do to like leverage the data that you already have at hand, just to optimize things automatically.
On a separate note, you asked what are the good opportunities. We've seen a big growth in strategy. So before you even start designing something, what are you going to design? One example is for a hospital where we did an analysis of the Chicago region to identify where the other hospitals were located and what those hospitals offered in order to guide the hospital builder to maybe change their program so that they could be more competitive in that market. So it's like a market analysis. So that kind of high-level strategy to identify for the client what they should do before you even build anything. A lot of our data analysts are involved in that kind of work.
And to build on that, because I work with Leland, we did take that same algorithm and apply that to a competition that we had for to leverage the design of the building and present that to the client. And it made it to a winning entry because the client has never heard of this kind of an analysis early on into a design competition. And it really shaped the building and the way we presented it to the client.
Actually, there's another, you just hit on it. The idea of, if knowledge is power, by being able to say, we know what we're doing, and here's the proof, that's a value in and of itself, certainly for winning work.
Yeah, and the beauty of that was like that analysis would have taken us weeks to do. Well, we only had 2 or 3 weeks for the competition. So implementing that and being able to present it to the client and them not expecting it really put us on another level with the competitors that we were going up to on stage with.
And it makes easier in a way because, let's say if you're a designer, based on your experience, you can come to a, you can make a specific design decision or make a building look a specific way, but for the client, it's sometimes hard to understand why you're doing it. So when you have something to kind of quantify in a way those, your decisions and be like, hey, this is why am I doing this? It's easier for the client to accept your decision too. So you're kind of using the data in a way to pursue the client to go in one direction.
Yeah, especially with kind of more manager type clients. They speak the language of no. You have to kind of speak their language. So.
Well, I think we're coming close to. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we just hit 8 o'clock, and I think people are hungry.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So well done, everybody. We've survived coronavirus, and we've successfully held up. I just want to say thank you, Babak, for joining us and sharing that wonderful presentation with the community. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Nicola, for moderating that, Ramon and Zulu for joining the panel, and for everybody else for joining. This will be recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube. Before everybody leaves, I just want to do a shout out for our organization. We are looking for people to help us with planning future events. If you have, or if you know of somebody with a great project example, anything related to computational design, let us know, because this is a platform to share these ideas. So if you want to be a presenter, let us know. If you want to be involved in planning, we have a planning committee that meets every 2 weeks to try to set up the next topics, put on these weekend workshops like the one we just had, and we are looking for people to join. So if you're passionate about this, you want to be a part of what's happening in Detroit, reach out. You can email me at leland.curtis@smithgroup.com or anyone else that you might know on this call here. But yeah, we are looking to grow this. So let us know if you have a project to share or you want to join. And once again, thanks everyone for attending.
Yeah.
Our next meeting will be in June.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care. Stay safe, everybody.
Everyone.